If you've ever felt a passion for a cause, it's probably stirred you to action. It could be as simple as baking pies for the church supper, canvassing for a political candidate, or working long hours in your local neighborhood hospital. And the reward is the knowledge that you've somehow made a difference. Well, tonight, Roger Karras has the story of someone with many passions. One of them resulted in an extraordinary mission.
Victoria Falls, a symbol of African fertility, but at times a beautifully deceiving one. Although billions of gallons of water spill over these falls into the Zambezi River every day, much of it is wasted. For the most part, the water flows through Zimbabwe and Mozambique, emptying into the Indian Ocean, doing little good along the way. And that's more than just a pretty geography lesson, because the other rivers in Zimbabwe and Mozambique, along with just about all the rest of East Africa, now look like this. As the land periodically dries up and a burgeoning population demands more and more of the fertile land, African wildlife is pushed into ever smaller pockets. All this competition for room and food, most of it coming from man, leads to this. It's called culling, shown on British television several years ago. It means to thin out the herd, and it's done with terrifying efficiency, especially with elephants. They are pretty hard to miss. It's done, say officials, to keep the elephants from overgrazing, in effect, eating themselves out of their own home. The value of their ivory could have something to do with it. The magnificent African elephant, the largest land animal on Earth, is being squeezed every year into smaller patches of land. Some conservationists fear it is being squeezed into extinction. Here in the Hwange National Preserve in Zimbabwe, where we went recently, 20,000 elephants have been pushed into an area that should support only 5,000. These giants can weigh up to 8 tons and eat 300 to 400 pounds of vegetation a day. That's a lot of foliage in the best of times. During a drought, it's a disaster unless they can migrate to find food and water. They can't. So they're killed off. It is the quickest and easiest way to deal with the problem, the inevitable quick fix, the males, the females, and the babies. That's where this man enters the picture. Arthur Jones, a multimillionaire from Ocala, Florida, along with his wife Terry, simply decided to jump into one of their 3 private 707s, fly to Zimbabwe, and rescue the baby elephants, or at least some of them, from an upcoming culling operation. Their plan was to bring the elephants back to their farm in Ocala and build an American herd of African elephants.
It's my opinion that the African elephant will be extinct on the African continent before the end of this century. We're picking up elephants which would otherwise be shot, and we're going to give them an opportunity to survive.
Arthur, with all the governments involved, there are 51 countries south of the Sahara in Africa alone. Why does it take Arthur Jones from Florida to save African elephants?
Don't hold your breath till any government helps anything. Governments, by the very nature of governments, are good at wasting money, at destroying resources, at creating problems, at building up problems.
There are people that say that the money you are spending on these elephants could be put to better use.
That's their opinion. And I'm sure that that would be true of practically anybody you ask. It's my money, Roger. I made it, and I'll spend it any way I choose.
It's his money, all right, and it took a bundle of it to get his 707 onto the isolated airstrip at the Hwange Game Reserve in Zimbabwe. The whole elephant operation cost an estimated $1 million, and he was there to supervise every penny of it.
10.
Negative.
4, 10.
That's 10, yeah.
Yeah, right.
Then 9.
All right, so
Okay,
that's 19.
Correct.
Okay, and then you get 3 times 21. 3 times 7 is 21.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which makes 63, right?
63,
That's
yeah,
how total
yeah,
that.
yeah, okay.
No one had ever tried to stuff 63 elephants into a 707 before, and to the local people, it was the best show to hit town since Dr. Livingston passed this way thumping his Bible a century ago. If stuffing elephants into an aircraft was a new experience for the people concerned, it was downright mind-boggling for the elephants. They seemed to have their own idea of where they wanted to go, and wherever that was, it wasn't on a jet plane. Since no elephant lift of this scope had ever been contemplated, much less attempted, no one was sure at the time if any of them would make it to Florida alive.
You get back.
So begins one of the more unusual animal odysseys of history. These baby elephants are frightened. For wild animals, this is a hardship, and their future is full of unknowns. But at least the passengers of this airborne ark are alive. That's more than can be said for their families.
To give the elephants the best chance of surviving their trip, their time inside the plane had to be kept to a minimum. So a precise timetable had to be met. The plane had to be off from Wanky just before sundown and arrive in Florida just after sunrise the next day. That was not an arbitrary schedule. The plane had to take off before darkness since the Wanky Strip is deep in the bush and has no lights. Smashing into an unseen animal at takeoff speed would have made a big batch of elephant stew. That wasn't the only problem.
You haven't got much more than
We got about
15 minutes.
Hey, Chuck, we only got about 15 minutes. We better get... You want to get an engine going, Hank?
Since there is no power at the strip capable of kicking a jet engine into action, Jones and his crew had to bring along their own starter. If it didn't catch, the elephants would have to be unloaded and the whole operation jeopardized.
Crank up this engine. Stay away from it.
Meanwhile, the sun kept going down, and Jones, now with his elephants aboard, had to round up his people.
Buck, take that damn vehicle and run over there and tell those people to get here now.
I'll go with him.
Finally, the starter took hold and got the engines running. Very little light left now. In a few moments, there would be none, and for the first time, Arthur Jones looked worried. Finally, everything was aboard. A full load of fuel brought by trucks from hundreds of miles away, 20 people, including the 2020 crew, and the 63 confused and unhappy baby elephants. There was still a little light left, enough to see the length of the runway, and everything was ready to go. Well, almost. The last hatch to close suddenly got stubborn and wouldn't. One little detail in a complex operation, for a moment, threatened to torpedo everything. But just as the last splash of sunset washed over the Wanky Preserve, the crew forced the door closed and the 707 started its run down the airstrip. With 40,000 pounds of elephants aboard, it was a long run. After eating up 65 seconds worth of runway at an eventual ground speed of 250 miles an hour, the big jet finally dragged itself out over the trees, and the 22-hour trip to the west was underway. All night long in the spooky half-light of the cargo bay, the ghostly figures of the handlers moved around the pens, feeding, petting, trying to reassure the frightened elephants. None of whom had volunteered and who couldn't comprehend what it meant to be 39,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean. Traveling in the same direction as the sun, but at only half its speed, we were caught by the next day's dawn a couple of 100 miles off the Florida coast, right on schedule. The handlers made a daylight inspection of their charges and were relieved to find, so far at least, that all the babies were still alive. And if their robust voices were any indication, they intended to hold their grudge over the indignities they had suffered. As we made our initial approach to Jones's private airstrip in Ocala, the first phase of Operation Elephant Lift was over.
You got to do first things first. First, you got to rescue the animals, which would otherwise have been killed, and we've done that. What happens next, we'll take it step by step.
And after a 16,000-mile round trip, we were home. The largest herd of African elephants in captivity then had to be unloaded, a much easier operation than getting them into the plane. They became the newest residents of what amounts to the Arthur Jones Private Wildlife Preserve. The baby elephants didn't seem to care about residency, though. After being penned inside the plane for 22 hours, all they wanted was water and lots of it. Then it was time to roam around and get acquainted with their new home. Some of them even got a little playful. And when a 1,200-pound elephant gets playful, it can ruin a cameraman's whole day. It doesn't do a whole lot for the camera either. As they became accustomed to their new home, they also seemed to be getting used to having people around.
Why'd you do it?
Because I like elephants and because nobody else is doing it, and it's very unlikely that anybody else will do it. And I simply could not live with myself if I idly stood by and watched the African elephant become extinct.
The extinction of the African elephant,
Come here, baby.
that's a matter of debate. At least its timing is. Many authorities say the species is not in danger yet. You can really have it on authority either way. So if Arthur Jones is wrong, it really doesn't matter. There'll simply be a few extra elephants roaming around somewhere in Florida. But if he is right, Florida could be one of the few places on Earth where your grandchildren will be able to see a herd of live African elephants.
Roger, I am as fascinated by Arthur Jones, this crusty eccentric, as I am by those sweet baby elephants. Who is Arthur Jones? Where did the money come from?
He has been rich and poor many times. He was a TV producer. He made a couple of features. And then, Barbara, he invented the Nautilus gymnasium equipment system. And now he's very, very rich.
I see. Does he have other animals, or does he just love...
About 1,000 alligators and crocodiles.
Alligators and crocodiles, I see.
2 white rhinoceros, a gorilla, and lots of very large rattlesnakes, and a huge serpentarium.
I think I'll go back to the elephants. You.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you, Barbara. We'll be right back.